TGIF, everybody. Thank God it's flat. Thank George it's Friday. I am glad to be here. We have Walt, Zach, Adam, John, and our very special guest, Crrow777 from Crrow777radio.com. Stick around. It's going to be another barn burner. Hang on, everybody. Well, welcome everybody back for another week right here on the Iron Realm, right here on YouTube for the Flat Earth Friday Fringe Cast. My name is Josh Corey. Just a quick hello to everybody out there in chat, everybody watching live, and hello to everybody catching it on the replay. We appreciate it. Mr. Walter Johnson, my co-host from the Ironworks over on Truth Frequency Radio. Walt, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm good. I am good. It is Friday. It's Ferric. We're striking iron. We have an amazing guest. We have a full house, man. I'm just going to shut up and let's go.
Let's do it. Mr. Zachary Zabala also joined us for a guest co-host this morning over on the Ironworks. Zach, how are you doing?
Oh, wonderful, man. Great day. Loving the nomad life. About 5 days to go, and I'll be on my journey. So I'm excited. Getting ready.
Getting ready to go all David Carradine Kung Fu style and just walk the earth. I dig it. John Savage, how are you doing, sir?
Doing well, Josh. Thanks a lot. Roller coaster ride of a week, but I've got myself a new hobby thanks to Zach. It's lock picking. So cheers, mate. You're about to waste hundreds and hundreds of hours of my time coming forward, and looking forward to the show big time.
Savage. All right, and then last we have Mr. Adam Meakin, the Adam Meakin, or that Adam. You were feeling a little better with the weather, Adam. You feeling a little bit better, you said, though. That's good to hear.
Yeah, feeling a lot better, mate. A lot better. Pathetic patient, as I said earlier, but that's medics for you. But yeah, good company. Always a good distractor. But yeah, my own fault. Too much swimming, too much having fun, and a bit of a gluey ear. So I've been a pathetic male. They're not my words. They're from the words of my wife.
Well, our hearts go out to Marie. I'm sure she had to put up with a very whiny Adam Meakin while he had an ear infection. Those things are absolutely miserable. Well, I say we jump right into it. We have so much stuff to cover. I mean, everybody sort of has little things they want to go over with our guest, Crrow. And, you know, we're lucky to even have him here. He calls Matt Landeman the hardest working man in activism. And he's probably right, but I got to say, Crrow has to come in at least second or third. He was just over on the Sun and Moon Family United channel, hanging out with Karen and everybody over there. He's over here. He's doing podcasts. He's shooting footage for a movie. He's doing all sorts of stuff. So everybody, let's welcome back to the Iron Realm, Crrow777.
Ahoy! No pun intended.
Welcome back, mate.
I see what you did.
Someone said common law, so I figured I had to frame it up.
Welcome to our vessel.
Permission to come aboard.
I was going to say permission granted to come aboard. There we go.
You have been birthed. On that note, you did four series on Crrow777 Radio, 4 law-related episodes.
Yeah, it kind of caused, of all the things we've done, there was quite an uproar. We'd have one person on who's been deep into it, and that would immediately start an argument saying that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. The next guy would come on, and this went on all the way till we had the living man from Scotland, Mr. Robert Sproul, who actually set up a common law court in Scotland. And kind of the argument died there because I just stated, look, here's the real deal. Here's an example. Let's see what happens. There's no arguing with what you can see. So we'll get a front row seat, hopefully, and see what comes out of this.
Yeah, that'll be good to keep up with, Rob, that's for sure. I've got a few friends here who'll be keeping a close eye on that. Kai Holloway, for one, who's looking to buy a courthouse, an old courthouse in the UK, to do exactly the same thing. So yeah, I'm glad to see, not being in the law movement for quite a while, basically since Flat Earth, it took me away from the law movement. It's good to catch up back with it. But I must say, listening to, I think you had 3 guests on, Alphonse, Rob, and there was another one, forgive me if I've forgotten the name, but I could pick out the meat from each of those, definitely, and agree with a lot of what they were saying. What did you come away from it, sort of overall thinking?
I think the other person you're trying to remember is Clint Richardson.
That's it.
Here's what I took away. Everyone argued about the differences and the idea of jurisdiction and all the arguments that came out. But here's what I saw. I saw commonality. I saw that there was a common thread of reality in each and sometimes differing points of view. And what I came away with was it's on the radar. People know it's a thing. There is a there. And from that point forward, I think things get worked out to the point where something successful happens and then it gets replicated. So that's really what I'm hoping for, and Rob especially. Some of the points of view we had are the logical outcome, where you might say everything in this system that makes life livable is part of a control system. So if you're not down with all this fictitious law, you have to leave the real world and, go live in a tent somewhere. And I think between that no nonsense point of view to the other end of the spectrum, right there in the middle somewhere, I think we're going to see people starting to make headway, and hopefully the things come out of it that are successful that we can replicate.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the problem I had with the law movement, and I could almost palpably feel the frustration in your voice when talking about it, was the lack of clarity and the lack of conciseness that you're being dealt when speaking with people who are trying to teach their method or their way. It's been a bane for me, because there are literally hundreds of people out there, and there are literally thousands of different ways to do this sort of thing. Did you get your clarity and your conciseness in the end?
Yes and no. Did I get a blueprint that I can walk in anywhere and whip it out and put it to use? I don't think so. Not yet anyhow. But what I did learn is the old saying, there's more than one way to skin a cat, is almost certainly true here. And when I began to logically break it down, as I try to do, just down to brass tacks, as simple as I can make it, I considered the other side of the coin, where there's a prosecutor walking into an admiralty court somewhere, and he's got his checkbook with him, of course, in case he loses, because this is all about commerce. How does he win a case? Does he do it the same way every time? And in fact, no, he doesn't. And so this is a very complex system put together by very bright people over probably centuries now. And so I think that probably there were parts and pieces of each of our guests that you could effectively use. But again, the problem is we have to have people stand up, go into the lion's den, stand tall, succeed, and then come back and say, look, this worked. And I think that has happened to some degree. I just think that information systems aren't making it easy for many of us to know it.
Yeah, I think it's... Sorry, Adam.
I'd get on that, John, if I could. I mean, you alluded to earlier Robert S. in Scotland setting something up, and I was privileged enough via Mr. Holloway, shout out Kai, just as I was getting into the Flat Earth, I was lucky enough to be involved in, I won't go into details, but with regards to the Tom Crawford case, where a common law court was convened in this country for the first time in about best part of 100 years. and we can do the judicial side. The issue we have at the moment is, unlike the state, we don't have a paramilitary force to enforce the judgments. Whilst we may have the law on our side, until we have a force that is either ignored by the state that enforces these edicts or is supported by the state, that's where I think our biggest problems are going to occur. We can make perfectly legal judicial statements, as was made with regards to Tom Crawford. The enforcement of such things is the thing they've spent hundreds of years fine-tuning and getting compliance with. That seems to be the biggest issue, is moving forward in how we can affect that.
And that, of course, goes on from Kai trying to, or did create the Peacekeepers, which was essentially trying to recruit a force that can enforce these things. So again, shout out to Kai Holloway for trying to do that. We'll have to get him back on again. I'm in touch with him at the moment. So yeah, have you heard of any of these things, Crow?
Well, this was one of the things I brought up heavily with the living man Robert Sproul in Scotland, how to enforce these things. And he gave me satisfactory answers, but there's a difference between giving someone a satisfactory answer and then being able to point to an action that was actually successful. But this is another place where I gained a lot of footage when I logically began to break it down after the fact. Truly, each living man and woman listening to this podcast right now is really subject to one law, and that's natural law, by extension, maybe common law. The truth of it is natural law will tell you when you're going to be born and when you're going to die. It is the ultimate arbiter of everything. So if we break it down as simply as we can, what we see from a lot of these fictitious courts, admiralty courts and others, is that they're violating the natural rights of every living human being. And one of the ways they've tried to make that palatable is by turning living men and women into people. So it's this sleight of hand game where we're not doing anything to you, we're doing it to a straw man, and the straw man is compelling you because you're so stupid to do these actions that you normally wouldn't do. So on the face of it, what was just said here is absolutely true. Until there was a way for enforcement, we got a hard row to hoe. But in fact, every time someone tries to stick up for their natural rights and fails, there's a black mark on somebody somewhere in this world, and they're not washing it off. That's my point of view.
Yeah, that interesting. On I think it was 110 of your podcasts, I hadn't heard the term strawminius homo, which is basically Latin for straw man, which shows that this isn't something we've pulled out of our ass recently. It's a real thing, isn't it?
Yeah, there's no getting away from it. And that's another problem. I think that the powers that be saw people beginning to unravel this, so they did what they always do. They jumped in and they muddied up the waters and made up all these fake tales and put agents of the system out there to make videos and do other things. But the truth is, we tracked it back in this country, in the United States, where Jason and I ended up drawing the line was somewhere around 1915, when the Census Bureau came to town. What we discovered was that before that, a live birth was registered in the family Bible, and that was accepted as an official record. In other words, a pair of parents who are adult human beings on their own made an official record needing no one to verify it. Then when it came into question, they produced their family Bible, and that was recognized. And what that shows is adult human beings operating as adult human beings. After the Census Bureau comes to town, then all of a sudden this idea of the birth certificate and being counted and turning grown adults into children that then need oversight. The real tell is in the birth certificate. What in essence happens at the birth certificate, as far as I can tell, is you're being registered. Anything in this world, and you can look this up in Black's Law Dictionary and other places, that is registered, you give away ownership of that thing in return for basically a certificate. So in essence, what happened was parents were fooled into informing on their children, giving the ownership of those children to the state or some other organization in return for a certificate. It's a hell of a thing, and it's proven out, particularly in England, because I was doing the research and I saw a damn car get crushed in England, and I said, wait a minute, I got to look at this. So I back up, watch the video, and we're told this person didn't have up-to-date registration, or they did something wrong with their car, and the powers that be came and crushed it. And I thought, how could that ever be? And then I realized it all at once, because the car was registered. He didn't own it.
Well, this also applies to your children as well, doesn't it? This is why they can come and take them.
That's the point I'm making, but I would further levy a very important idea. Even by the Black's Law standards, to enter in a contract is in fact a meeting of the minds. Children cannot enter into a contract, and some places say that the adult can enter the child into a contract, but usually what it amounts to is the adult stands in until the child comes of age. But here's the point I would make. I don't think I've ever met a living human being that understands the contract that was entered into at their birth. And I don't think their parents did, and therefore it is not a meeting of the minds, and therefore from the very get-go it is fraud, even by the definition of the people who made the definition.
Yeah, prima facie fraud. There was an interesting sort of theory, maybe not theory, but the Cester KV Act of 1666, count the ways, that was the reason why children were called master up until the age of 7, and right. That sort of ties in with the Cester KV Act after, I think it was the Great Fire of London or the Plague or something along those lines, where you were considered dead if you didn't come back and inform the state that you were alive within 7 years. You're familiar with that, right?
Yeah, but that's fraud on the face of it too. But you point out a critically important thing too. Words have meaning. And when you're being called master, we could easily look up the definitions all over the place, Black's Law, regular dictionaries, old Oxford dictionaries, and you would find out very quickly that we could refer to that young person being called master as master of his own domain. Mm-hmm. You see, and the reason for that, part of the reason, is he's not old enough to enter into a contract. But for some reason, he's old enough to be the master still. By the time you get up to Mr., Mrs., Ms., and all these other things, you've in fact picked up what the Bible calls a flattering title. And the Bible instructs us all not to get involved with flattering titles. And I don't care what anyone thinks of religion, because what is contained in the Bible has nothing to do with religion. In my view, a religion is a corporation. Corporation's a dead entity. It has nothing to teach me spiritually about anything in this world, but nonetheless, we have this book called the Bible. It's not alone. Every major religion has a version of it, and what we find is that the natural laws were encoded into it in allegory stories, in metaphor, in all these non-obvious ways. The only law we are truly subject to has been encoded in this place. And the problem is that so many people confuse the Bible with whatever religion they have chosen to follow. But nonetheless, that is a enduring document that shows the way to anyone who has eyes to see with.
Yeah, and in the Bible also it says don't make oaths, swear oaths, doesn't it?
Right. It says everything that you would ever need to know, and it shows when you begin to understand what was outlined there in clever stories and obfuscation and even encoding or metaphor, that where we have come is so far from the natural life of a human being, even our language. The English language is maybe the most perverted form of communication that I can think of. And it was cobbled together from many other places, but it was designed to do one thing, to lower human minds. That's what it was designed to do. And here we are all speaking it because we don't have anything else to use. And it shows kind of the overarching nature of the system. But furthermore, it shows that when you are going to commit fraud, you really need a kryptonite net. And our language is part of that kryptonite net.
Yeah. And on language, it's the knowledge of understanding that when you're in court, when you're in their system, you're not speaking the King's English, as they call it. You're speaking, entered into legalese at that point, and literally almost none of us are versed in how to speak legalese.
I started to come to a point where I began to look at the jurisdiction idea very carefully. And I think it's possible that the jurisdiction can be... See, I am of a mind that universal law states, universal law being the governing principle under God, if you will, of all living human beings. And it states that you cannot trap a human being outright with no path to liberation. If you do that, you've violated universal law. And in that, we find that Black's Law was the document that they made. And even the word Black's Law, words have meaning. It's blacks. It's the same as hurts, you know, in the other shows we've done. Words have meaning. And when you hurt someone, we know what the meaning is. When a thing is black, we know what's being implied. And even though we're being told it's attributed to a person's name, I'm trying to see what's gone on here. But I think I kind of lost the original thread there.
Well, bringing up Black's Law Dictionary it's such a in-your-face demonstration that you're not speaking English in courts, or else there wouldn't be such a thing as Black's Law Dictionary. It's right there in your face. If they were speaking English, then they wouldn't need a law dictionary.
The key is, John, isn't it, is the, whether it's willing or unwittingly, acceptance to their language. And it's got to the point now where it is almost unwitting that we're knowing and pointing out that Black's Law Dictionary is the language you're actually using, and the meanings of the words, the ones that are in that dictionary, is part of the con, and part of the like a dodgy double glazing salesman, isn't it? You're being sold something incorrectly because the language you're using is not necessarily the language of the intonation of what's being said or what the implication.
Well, you know, another argument that I think holds water all day long could be made here. Each of us is put into school, and while we're in school, we are taught by the school that if we don't understand what a word means, we pick up the English Oxford Dictionary to understand what that word means. So how is it that in any way Black's Law Dictionary, which is trained to a certain select few called Esquire, which incidentally is one step above gentleman and one step below knight, how can they make the argument that that definition trumps what everyone else has been taught? It's another form of fraud, and it's indefensible if you take it logically.
It's pure doublespeak, really, isn't it? It's basically doublespeak. You're lured into the courts, and you're arrested at the side of the road. Do you understand what I'm doing to you? Do you understand what I've just said to you? And you're being asked these things, and every time you're essentially being offered into a contract. You're being offered to relinquish your rights, you know, by swearing on the Bible in court, by even entering past the bar in court. You are sort of tacitly agreeing to their system. So there are ways and means of staying away from their system. But what I always used to like was Dean Clifford, the way he described it, of being able to manage your straw man as well as your natural man, in so far as knowing when you're putting a different hat on. You know, you could be a chef by day and a father by night, and a mechanic at the weekend, and it's each one of those roles has you putting on a different hat. There are ways of playing the system, but I think we'd all agree you better not touch this unless you know exactly what the hell you're doing.
Well, I think there's a lot of truth to that. You know, this is not a game. You better understand what you're up against before you go wandering in somewhere, because basically you're wearing diapers in their eyes. But even everything we're outlining here is just so much more fraud. Here's an example. I grew up in San Diego, and there are sheriffs there the sheriffs are not the city police. City police handle incorporated areas. The sheriff handles unincorporated areas. So you have this big place, which is called San Diego County. And within San Diego County, there are all these cities. And each city that is incorporated has La Mesa Police, San Diego Police, any other police. But the sheriff handles all the rest of it. For my entire lifetime, they were pretty much acting as policemen or in transition on the sides of their cars. And they were green and white, by the way, all my life. Some years ago, they changed the slogan on their police car to say, well, it did say to protect and serve. This is the idea of a policeman, to protect and to serve. Then they changed the colors of the sheriff to black and white, and they changed the slogan to keeping the peace. Now, words have meaning, and what we are witnessing is the open flipping of the switch from the idea of a policeman that's there to protect and to serve you to someone who is now an officer. And as we all know, where does an officer belong? In a corporation. Corporation has officers. And now it has nothing to do with benefiting you in any way. That officer is there for one reason, for commerce. And this is proven out again whenever you find yourself in front of the magistrate by the fact that the prosecutor has to bring his checkbook. This is about money, but it doesn't end there. Even the Gregorian calendar, in my view, is wholly about commerce. The reason we went from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar, the correction that was supposedly made is almost insignificant to not make a difference. What was actually going on was it was pulling people out of time. They add daylight savings time, at the equinoxes to do that further. But what's happened is they've clicked us all into a commerce-based system. And this has everything to do with the fraudulent control of society. And the real truth is any one of us should have the right to stand up and say, I'm not playing ball here. Or if I do play ball, I will choose when I play ball. Like you said, chef by day, father by night. The real issue at hand here is we cannot participate in money, in systems, in services that make the modern age livable unless we step in to the fraudulent nature of the web they've spun. And that's the real problem.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. It's the language is very useful, and an informed use of that language is very powerful for us. We've got to use it in an informed way. But sadly, we can't. Where we are at the moment, from my perspective, we do have to still engage with the system, and it's an intelligent engagement that is the way forward for us, and certainly in the short term, until we are able to enforce the law correctly ourselves. Because as you point out, Crrow, the only people at the moment, those that are there to serve and protect, are now there to keep the peace, which is a legal commercial term.
They own it. They own the piece now.
And they get to define it as well.
Yeah.
I mean,
they don't get to define it without fraud. And any person who gets pulled over by a police officer and refuses to initiate in the contract is well within their rights. The problem is this monster has become so ginormous that you're probably not going to like what happens next. But nonetheless, you are well within your rights to refuse contract. And the problem is, until enough of us begin to do this, we're all going to look for those loopholes. So what we're going to do is say, you guys are doing all this fraud with these clever loopholes. Now we've got to live our life figuring out what the loopholes are using your fraudulent system so that we can know some modicum of freedom. But it's not even that simple. The truth is that there is no one on this panel who has the right to own property. And yet there are people born every year with the right bloodline, the right name from birth, who are in fact eligible to own property. So even just avoiding being run over by whatever legal system you find yourself in, this problem goes way beyond that. And you see, for us to become human beings in the modern age, there's no place for this archaic nonsense. Mm-hmm. And in a lot of ways, that's, in my view, why 5G is coming in so quickly. They got to have a weapon in every antenna on every corner, which is lowering people and making them sick, because it's getting out of control here. Too many inmates are understanding where the keys lie now.
Well, I'll tell you, yeah, I think we should probably move on to 5G because that's quite close to my heart as well. But just on a closing note, it was interesting when I did my law degree, which was actually it was worded as maritime law, not a standard law degree. This was called maritime law. But I remember on the first lecture we had, the guy stood at the front and said there's basically two types of law. There's contract law and there's tort law. We're not going to bother with tort law, so we're going to concentrate on contract law, and that was literally it. And of course, by tort law, I'm assuming that is the common law. It's natural law. It's dealing with hurting people when you have a tort against them. But yeah, we brushed over it, and even after a degree in it, I walked away with that having no idea about any of this until years down the line, and then all sorts of things started clicking into place. But yeah, what is the deal with 5G?
Could you just clarify the differences? I mean, you're probably best positioned to give a succinct description between common law, natural law, and more importantly, the law we engage with, which is maritime or universal code.
This is the way I view it. Each human being is born understanding the law. You never have to pull over and grab a 5-year-old child and say, hey, today we're going to teach you that murdering people is bad, because that 5-year-old child already knew it. In other words, we are all born understanding natural law. Nobody needs to school you. It is innately understood by 99% of all humanity. By extension, common law was the attempted codification. In other words, people always need to write things down so we can all agree. So common law was the extension of natural law. So we were all very sure that we understood that this is the rules we interact within society with. Everything beyond that is legal fiction. Everything beyond that is illusion, and almost all of it fraud. And unfortunately brought to us by the people who have always pretty much owned everything. But it goes so much further, because in order to put in their nonsense system that we all live under now, they had to obscure a history where we were in natural science, in natural law, or by extension, common law. They had to hide the fact that probably in the 14th century, there were people living better than we do now by a long shot, maybe only working 14 or 15 weeks in a year. The people who had enough time to build those cathedrals and enough higher mind to understand the principles needed to do it. That's what's been hidden in the history we cannot see, in my view. And I've done a hell of a lot of research. It's all to convince you that, by the way, the cowboys only lived till they were 45, so you're doing pretty damn good living to 80. Nonsense, all of it. There were times in the history that's been obscured that show how much better the life of a human being can be. And the reason they need to hide it is because their nonsense fiction system is basically, for lack of a better metaphor, the difference between heaven and hell on earth. In other words, there were times when we came as close to heaven here as we could, and these people have obliterated it with this way we live now, and that's a hell of a lot closer to hell.
Yeah, almost like the exact opposite. That's what they teach us. That's how they've done it. Everything they tell you is good for you is actually not good for you, and everything they tell you is bad, hence illegal, for your protection, is actually some kind of medicine almost.
You know, everything we ever needed is still here. It's called the natural world, and what's happening now is technology is being brought to bear at just a blinding speed. And what technology represents is a fictitious world being brought up to replace the natural world. We are headed towards transhumanism and any number of things that will prove these things out. It's not really arguable anymore. That's where we're going. But the reason we're going there, so many people miss. You see, these black-hearted kind of rich families that go back into antiquity further than we can understand, they want to be the kings of everything. And there's a natural world here that they cannot be the kings of. They cannot dictate when a bird is born. They cannot dictate the lifespan of a deer. They cannot dictate the very building blocks of the natural world. But what they can dictate is the fictitious high-tech world that they're bringing up around us. And so if people take the time to consider what all this technology is bringing, it's basically a fictitious version of reality, much like the Matrix, where they can claim kingship. And not only can they claim it, they built it, they own it. In the same way they own the central banks. No different.
Just to go slightly askew, Sheeps and Neeps did a little show tonight, and a big shout out to him, and good luck, bruv, in your fight against that big C. There's a few of us over there know a little bit about this and are helping people as we speak. And if you want anything, like information, help, whatever, you know where we are. Good luck in your quest. But he highlighted something this evening. He was talking about a drug called Savitex, I think, and we're getting close to the point where a natural plant is going to be illegal by the population allowing it to be illegal, yet a refined pharmaceutical product for the treatment of cancer is going to be legalized. And it's kind of that agreement with that society is giving. And this is the big thing with all the common law stuff. They can't take it from us. We give it freely. And it's kind of, we're heading into a crossroads again, I think, with, as you'll allude to, John, the 5G, looking at the treatment of natural plants being illegal, yet pharmaceutical products of the same thing being legal. We're heading down that road. We're about to give away in the next few years a shitload more of our innate rights, and then gaining control over the life of a deer crow, to put it simply. You know, that's what they're desperate to even define that.
I started to go down the alchemical road a long time ago for the simple reason that when I was young, I was told that's the devil's work. That's the devil's playground. So naturally, being me, I said, well, why? Why is it the devil's playground? I'm going to go look and make up my own damn mind. And what I found was it's actually natural science. That's what alchemy is. It set out to do everything it did within the scope of what nature allows. Okay? Now, if I have cancer anytime in my life, I guarantee you the way that I will be treated is with the Gerson method. Anyone out there who has to make a tough decision, look into it. And I will say this, after many years of study of alchemy and plants and other things, and I've grown things my whole life. First off, plants are in fact, provably, the carriers of life essence. The reason you get your milk heated up to a point that they say you won't get sick from it is because they're killing the life in it. That's why everything is pasteurized. That's why cheese has all the life pulled out of it. Not in the too distant past, there were plenty of foods where it was still living when you ingested it. Now, the basis for alchemy should be understood by anyone, because what was just said here a moment ago can be contrasted to what the pharmaceutical companies are doing. In alchemy, there are basically three overarching steps. Let's talk about spagyrics for a minute as an example, because so many medicines are synthesized, in other words, fictitiously created based on what plants have done. In alchemy, the three steps to producing a thing within nature is as follows. First, you break it apart into its constituent elements. Secondarily, you purify it. And then the third thing is called the alchemical marriage. You combine it all back together. So if I was going to take a plant that I knew was medicinal, I would do these steps. Now, when pharmaceutical companies come along, they do the first step. They do the breaking apart. They don't, for the most part, do the purification or I forget the word for it, the grand expanding. In other words, it's more than just purification. They're actually enhancing in a spiritual way this purification, and then they remarry all these natural elements back together. Pharmaceuticals break it apart, and then everything else on the tail of that is man-made nonsense.
You know what, Crow? Just bringing it back to, and I've only literally just before going out for my tea tonight, Sheeps was outlining this current pharmaceutical products, and you're correct. What modern pharmacy has tried to do is isolate individual compounds and patent, use, and sell those individual compounds. What's interesting with what's going off certainly from a knowledge point of view, but what we're seeing in this formulated product is it's being marketed in the same fundamental way that it's an isolated compound. But from what I've learned tonight, and I will do some more reading on this, is actually it's not an isolated compound as you would consider most pharmaceuticals. Actually, this is no different to any of the homemade products. It is basically the same extracted spagyric compound that we would make, but labeled as a pharmaceutical. And what they're doing is they're taking the concentration of a particular component within there, the CBD. But what they're not doing is listing the other pharmaceutical components. And I think from what I've heard tonight, there is a point in law, commercial law, admittedly, but that actually they're breaking the law in this. They're not informing, from a pharmaceutical sense, people truly of what they're about to ingest in this pharmaceutical. They're only listing what is considered the active ingredient, whereas we all know it's a synergistic effect with all of these kind of alkaloids, or whether they're cannabinoids or of other different sources. And that's what I found was quite significant. What's going on at the moment, they're trying to put and label now whole plant products in the same manner, and it's heading down a route for me that is fraudulent and requires our agreement to it again. For this next phase.
Of course it's fraudulent, because there is no intent to cure. Pharmaceutical companies have no intent, which is a critically important idea, to cure anybody. Because if they could just send out a pill or a shot or a drink that cured someone, that person is no longer a customer. And that goes staunchly in the face of what corporation is about. Corporation is about making more money every year, next year, next year, next year. The point I would make here is that in breaking a thing apart, it's the same as saying an apple a day keeps the doctor away, and then having a pharmaceutical company come in and say, well, it's not the apple, it's the vitamin C. So we don't need the apple. And it's nonsense. That apple has the divine living essence in it, as do all plants. And I'll share a thing with you that may spur a point of view you've never considered. Let's think a minute about alcohol. Did you know that alchemy proved centuries ago that the spirit of every plant that does photosynthesis is methyl alcohol? So when you go to do these principles where you're breaking a thing apart, one of the products you will get from any plant that I've described is methyl alcohol. In other words, you could go to your drugstore right now and grab methyl alcohol off the shelf. That is the spirit of the plant. Alchemists recognize the spirit, the soul, and the body. To cut to the chase, the spirit from a plant is the methyl alcohol. The body is like salts. Literally, when someone says you're the salt of the earth, this is where it came from. So like the material things are salts. That leaves the soul. Very few people understand when they walk into a liquor store and see the word spirits on a bottle of booze, why it's called that. This is why they call it that. Because every plant in the world that does photosynthesis, from the alchemist's point of view, would tell you the spirit of that plant is alcohol. But if you know something of alchemy, you will understand that the alchemist regularly uses that spirit to extract the soul of a thing. So now the next time you go into a liquor store and pick up a bottle clearly labeled spirits, and you understand what I just told you, that the spirit is used to extract the soul, maybe you can think a little bit differently about what's been passed off as okay in this world that is ignorant of natural, true things. I would just add all that.
Well, as you say, Crow,
it's interesting that alcohol is actually an integral part to voodoo ceremonies when they are trying to be possessed by a external entity as well.
Anyone who wants to learn something of alchemy, which is not easy, by the way, because from the oldest accounts you can get at, first of all, back in the day, an alchemist was never told how to start. He was told there was a start, but he had to use his own cunning and cleverness as a human being to determine where does the path even start. He had to find it on his own. And then when he had found it on his own, the other alchemists who knew things would encode things in a certain way so that not everybody could just trip up on it. They had to earn it. They had to have the intention to learn these things. But here's even a worse part of it. Many of the things were false starts that were then encoded. And the reason is because you're just not worthy if you can't recognize correct from incorrect. And anyone who put their spiritual mind forward and put their intent forward was liable to find the correct path. But so many of the things in this world have been pulled up around our eyes when in fact, anyone who wants to look at the oldest text they can get their hands on will in fact be told the truth. The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam is a good example. So here's a man from where we would call currently the Arab nations who wrote the Rubaiyat. And if you read it now, for me, it's acceptably true, the things you're being told. And this inverted bowl we call the sky, crawling cooped under which we live and die. Lift not your arms to it in prayer, for it moves as impotently as you and I. These are true statements, provably true statements, and yet our indoctrination into school, our indoctrination into what medicine is, have got us all to believe in fantastic things. And the truth is, currently where medicine is, there is no intent to cure anybody, because you are no longer a customer, and we live in a commerce-based system ruled by admiralty law, which was in fact put in place for commerce.
Wow, yeah, that's like you say, words have meaning, don't you? And that spirit is, there's definitely a lot more to that. On that, I mean, not only do we have a pharmacist being Adam, we've also got an alchemist being Zach. Zach, have you heard of that book? Are you reading that? What's the book you're reading at the moment?
I'm actually reading I've read it multiple times, but it's a book by somebody who's still alive, Robert Allen Bartlett. Sorry. He actually teaches a school out in the state of Washington. But it's just called Real Alchemy, a primer to practical alchemy. And it just teaches you about how to make spagyrics and ends tinctures and things like that. It gets a little bit into the metals and using ore to get but everything you said is exactly the same that he teaches. The spirit, the soul, the body of a plant, they're all, that's all there is.
There's no lie in the natural systems which have been hidden away from us. And alchemy tells you the truth. In the same way, the Tibetan calendar to this day still use the elemental idea to express everything. Like if you went to a place even today called Tibet and you were going to be treated, they would ask you, when were you born? Have you ever been asked by a doctor when you were born? The reason they're doing it is because the natural system recognizes that in this month, an iris may grow, but sure as hell a daisy won't. Or in this month, we might see a tulip grow, but we sure as hell won't see this other flower. People are no different in this living system. So they ask you, when are you born? They examine where you are in the cycle of time right now. They use plants that have been carefully measured by the full moon, by the cycle of where the sun is in an acceptable year, referred to in the Bible as the acceptable year of the Lord. These things are the basis of a reality that makes Earth as close to heaven as we could make it. We were there once sometime before that's been hidden from us. And these are the natural things that have no lie. These are the natural things that a 5-year-old child would not find fault with, you see. And everything else that's replaced it is fraud, fiction, half-truths, all these things.
It's a bit like you're saying there, you're discussing this plant, and when things are growing, and it's a bit like astrology, where the importance has been not only diminished, but put into the realms of hoodoo and nonsense.
Right, they've made fun of it.
Yeah.
And well, I've said on so many shows, for anyone who is a thinking individual, I'll tell you a thing right now that will prove to you that the idea of astrology, even though it's been made to be ridiculous in the modern age by most of the usages we see, it's the real true way of things. It is the clock for this place we call Earth. And the zodiac does one thing that nobody listening can deny. It places the sun in the acceptable year in the biblical sense, the acceptable year of the Lord. Without the zodiac, we cannot place the sun. And that proves outright the value of what we've lost when we stopped looking at the sky and started looking at our wrist. You see, on our wrist is artificial fictitious time. It will give you daylight savings time. So randomly, twice a year on the equinox, the powers that be will say, guess what? It's not 4 o'clock, it's actually 3 o'clock. Or it's not 5 o'clock, it's actually 6 o'clock. And these things are designed to pull you out of the critical cycle that is demonstrated by the sky clock. And I guarantee you, every powerful place in this world that matters is tracking the sky clock. The Vatican shows it on its face in its courtyard. St. Peter's with the massive sundial with the obelisk from Heliopolis, or the City of the Sun. The sky clock is critically important, and it is the timepiece for the alchemist. Almost every alchemical procedure that matters needs to start at the spring equinox, the true beginning of the year. And as this process goes forward, the phase of the moon, where the sun is in the given hour of the day, all these things matter because there's a spiritual component to human beings. And therefore, if we're making medicines in alchemy, there is a spiritual component to the alchemy. But most importantly, what has not been lost is the essence of life. And plants are the carriers of the essence of life. So the next time you buy a product that's been pasteurized, in fact, what you're buying is something dead. There is no life in it. And it doesn't take a genius to understand, I can eat this dead thing or I can eat this living thing. Which one might be of higher value?
And it's interesting that it's very hard here in the States to even get access to raw milk that still has that life in it. In fact, it's illegal and can get you arrested.
Of course, because if we drank the living essence that could be transmitted in milk, we would all be healthier for it. Of course.
And I look back in horror when my children were born, and we'd make their milk out of powder, and it would go into the microwave for 2 or 3 minutes, and this was considered absolutely normal. But and that's another thing that would bring us back to 5G as well, is the frequencies that they're putting us under, like microwaves. That works on frequency as well, and is almost certain designed to murder every sort of essence of life that's in food that we consume, isn't it?
Well, there's another good point here. I guess we can play the old words have meaning game. So a child needs to be fed at 3 a.m. Back in the day, some decades ago, that child would have got living milk from its mother that didn't need to be heated because the body heat of the mother provided that, but the milk was alive when it went into the child. In the current age, what you say is true. A powdered thing called formula, words have meaning, is heated with a microwave. I mean, you can see where this goes. So I ask you, if we could go back 100 years to where every child was fed living milk from a living mother, what was the health? What was the lifespan? What was the potentiality of that kind of an upbringing compared to microwaved formula, for crying out loud?
Well,
you mentioned that earlier, didn't you, in terms of cowboys down then. We were always taught that, you know, as peasants, as working class peasants, we're very lucky to get to retirement age, etc. Yeah, there's all sorts of, you know, look at like teeth. You know, in the 1700s, when the posh people were having chronic dental decay, where did they get teeth from? We're told, they start to rip them out of prisoners' mouths and that. But the reality is, they went and dug up old skeletons and took the healthy teeth from those in the past, where those teeth were perfectly well. And that's another example of the way we're mugged off in terms of what we're told the past is and how things were in the past, you know.
That's interesting what you say though, Adam, because I was brought up as a child. My father was obsessed with graveyards, and so we were constantly being dragged around graveyards. And it's true, this day you go down the local graveyards that have been there for 150 years or so, and there's almost no one in there that is less than 80 years old. I mean, to tell us that we were only living to 45 is an absolute. It's a fraud on its own, and what it includes is infant mortality mainly. That's my opinion. Which drastically,
which is also a lie.
Yeah, exactly.
You see
because
those, but Martin Lee's done some work on that with some of his guys, looking at actually how far back gravestones go, and it's a very, very short time. And the suggestion is that they're wiped out and removed, these gravestones, because for one particular reason is they would quite clearly indicate that the narrative we're told about how we're all getting healthier is a falsehood again, and can't argue with gravestones unless you turn them upside down and turn them into paving slabs.
Nope, we're the exact opposite is true. We're suffering from lower energy, dementia. Our lifespans are shorter. We're becoming sick at younger ages. But this conversation we just had really underscores a no-nonsense thing anyone listening can logically work out. What are we subject to as living human beings? What are you truly subject to in this lifetime? I submit that the only thing you are truly subject to is natural law. There is no way you can separate yourself from it. You will be born when you are born. You will live the amount of years you live, and you will die under the aegises of natural law when it is time for you to do so. That is the way of things. Everything else on top of that is not something that you have to follow. If I get pulled over by a police officer, I don't have to listen to a damn thing he says. He may beat me up, he may drag me into jail, but at no time do I have to cooperate or do any other thing. And the systems that we live in now are basically designed to do one overarching thing: ensure that we do not find our way back to the natural world. Because a human being that finds their way back to the natural world will begin to understand the sky clock. They will begin to understand that plants are in fact the life carriers. The essence of a plant is life. They are in charge in this world of carrying life essence. When you begin to discover these things, the lot of a human being in this world begins to change drastically. And unfortunately, the shadow people who run this joint have gone so far the other way. In my view, even cheating death. I think they're living a lot longer than we are. But I would also submit that it's quite likely that when they're done with this life, they're done for good. And I would further submit that human beings go on forever in most cases. This is not the whole of what a human being is. This is a bit, in my view, like 5th grade or 6th grade. We got to do what we got to do in this particular cycle of hardship and necessity. And when we're done, we graduate to whatever's next. But I suspect there are truly people who don't have graduation coming when this is all over.
Yeah, I have to agree on that front, definitely. So how else are they attacking us? Because I plan on playing this episode to my children, who are currently obsessed with their laptops, playing games, watching cartoons, watching silly vines. Generally, not. What am I trying to say? What are the other methods that they're using against us? I mean, I'm talking specifically sort of Tavistock Institute, our media, everything that is literally designed to degrade us back to cavemen, basically, if they ever existed.
Well, since there's going to be young people listening, I think this is an important point. If you took apart any given 6-month period of your life and carefully dissected that 6 months of life to determine where did all the violence come from that you were exposed to? Where did all the killing and the fighting and the shooting and the death come from in that 6-month period of life? I would estimate the average person listening will say, well, it came from online, it came from YouTube, it came from Facebook, it came from the evening news, it came from the movies, and it came from gaming systems. When you begin to understand what exposure to violence at this level does to a young mind, it basically becomes nearly 100% of all the violence and hatred and negative emotion they'll be expressed to. When I was a child and I used to come here to Rhode Island, I would leave my house for a week, never coming back. I would go down to the water. I would find my own food. I would live on the water. We would build forts and tents to live on the beach. And at no time did I see anyone murdered, no one raped, no one shot, no one injured in any way. And that lifetime has provided a path for me to see now. So to the young people who think it's perfectly acceptable to say frag them, kill them, shoot them in a video game, you better understand that in the real world, these concepts that you're bandying about so easily are unacceptable things. And when you truly see death, and you truly see a person shot, and you truly see a person beat up in real life, you will begin to understand what's been force-fed into your head every single day that you picked up digital devices or television or movies. And it's critical to get away from these things.
And you speak from experience here. You were in the Army, weren't you?
I was in the Marine Corps during the first Gulf War, yeah, but that wasn't where I experienced the most death. The most death that I ever experienced was my first job out of high school, because I quit high school in 9th grade. And my father was so upset being a college professor, he thought he'd teach me a lesson. So he helped me get my first job at an old folks home, thinking that that would scare me back into school, which didn't actually work because I've been stubborn since I was young. But what I saw there was death on a whole new level every day, just about, because I was pretty much the only young man working there around all the nurses. So, of course, the hardest portions of that place is where I was put. And when you begin to experience death at an age and you understand what it is, there's no going back to fake death, and there's no going back to movies and these other things. But, of course, in the military, too, you see a different kind of violence.
Yeah, I mean, and this is not by chance, is it? I mean, they are conditioning the children to be the next generation of soldiers. I mean, this is Tavistock 101, isn't it? Amongst millions of other things that they're teaching us, so-called.
Well, I have nephews that were world ranked in certain games that involve shooting. One of them was #1 in the world for a while, according to the online ranking. And so young people should understand, first of all, you're not being ranked so that your friends can be impressed. Someone had to spend a hell of a lot of money to put the servers together and the code written and the algorithms achieved to gather that information and post it freely online. The reason you're being ranked is because the powers that be need to know who the best of the best are. And the reason they need to know who the best of the best are is because they may be able to use your skills. So as we all know, the days of hitting a battlefield with an army tank and an M16 are going away. That's being replaced by remote vehicles, which is in fact basically what your video game is. The next time you pick up your Xbox controller and shoot a person, it's no different than the war of the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they could make those leaderboards private for the powers that should not be. If they want to know who #1 is, I mean, they could just pass that name along. A daily update with Joe Smith being #1. But making them public inspires that sense of competition so that you can feed that part of your ego and dominate everybody else out there in the digital world.
That's right. It's free gasoline to the mind who's #1, who's the mind that's #10. Free gasoline for that mind because, man, now they got a rep. They got an online reputation to defend, and they will defend it until they quit sleeping. I've seen it happen, but the point is, there is a natural world out there where for the average human being, violence is a very rare thing. Death is a rare thing. You will not see it every day. Human beings are different in this way from animals because animals are not quite to the level of a human being yet. They experience a lot more violence. And the example of that is a deer. Whenever you see a deer in the woods and he hears the slightest noise, he's instantly afraid and runs. The reason is because that deer understands there's things here that can kill me. And he's right. There are things. He eats grass. He has no claws. There are things in the woods that can kill a deer, but that is not true for a human being. So what these games are seeking to do is turn you into the deer and the lion at the same time. They want to make it acceptable for you to do violence to others, but also afraid the violence will be done to you. But I'll reiterate again, you're a human being, and you do not have to be afraid in that way.
And what speaks volumes is that these highly sophisticated, intricately designed games are free online. I mean, what do we know about things that are free? We are the currency.
That's right. If you're given a service that's free, then you better understand you're the product. And in this day and age, cash is no longer king. They just invent cash out of thin air, and then they hand you paper, call it money, has no value, no big deal for that to get created. What is king now is data. And every time you pick up a cell phone or an Xbox controller or the remote to your television or anything in this world that is digital, in fact, your data is being collected. And for those young people who like to watch movies, go back and watch The Winter Soldier, the Marvel movie Winter Soldier. They tell you the truth.
Yes,
The 21st century is an open book. And a guy all the way back in the 20s or 30s wrote the algorithm that told him how to read this book. And all that data that is being so freely given has given them the ultimate map of humanity. And what that gives them is the ultimate guide to controlling it all.
Wow, scary shit. How does that lead on to 5G? I mean, what are we up against? 5G, they're talking about just about every single thing that we come in contact with will be connected. Is that right?
It's going to be called the Internet of Things, and that should tell you something, because you're part of that internet, and that makes you a thing. That's the view of the people designing this system. You are a thing in the Internet of Things. Your toaster will be a thing. Your cell phone will be a thing. Your refrigerator, your car, and every other damn thing you ever run into that's connected to the internet, which is right around the corner, will be part of the Internet of Things. 5G is made by a millimeter wave. Here's something for young people. You want to know what can be done with millimeter waves? Go look up the active denial system called ADS. It is a sonic energy weapon. I don't know if sonic's the right word. It is a wave weapon that you can watch online be shot at a person. It's referred to as both a pain wave and a heat wave, and it is the same technology, millimeter waves, that will be bringing us the 5G network. In other words, since we all understand that 5G signals, millimeter waves, do not travel that far, it requires that an antenna is put up every 100, 150 feet or so. But it also does not go through walls, which means if you're on a street corner and you go inside of a shop to continually be on the internet inside that shop, these millimeter wave antennas need to be. They're described as being absorbed by trees, which is just a sly way of saying things with water and cells absorb these unhelpful radio waves. But the long and short of it is they're going to put a weaponizable antenna on every street corner. In other words, if we decide we don't like 5G anymore and we all run out to the streets to protest, what if those antennas are now active denial systems, and they could easily disperse any single person standing there with pain or heat waves? That's where this heads. But to top it off, it's been demonstrated over and over and over that millimeter waves are extremely unhealthy. And I'll point out another thing. We're all used to microwaves in this country. Microwaves is a lesser version of the millimeter wave. And in 1973, I think Russia outlawed the use of microwave ovens.
That's right.
Because they understood that it was harmful to the health of a human being. Currently, some years ago, France outlawed cell towers or 5G anywhere near schools and its children. Spain has outlawed the use of 5G all over the place. And I think Russia has wholesale denied the use of 5G because it does damage to human beings.
And here in the UK, 5G will be being put up absolutely everywhere. And like you say, it may not be a thing of the future. It may already be here. How many of us know exactly what is at the top of that pole on our street corners and everything else? And mentioning millimeter waves, that's the same technology that they're using in the airport scanners that we were going on a flight somewhere out of Heathrow, I think it was, or Gatwick, and I decided to look up millimeter wave scanners before I went up there, because I needed to make a decision as to whether I would be happy with my family going through any of these things. Of course, my son got dragged out and told to go through them. I was at the back of the line screaming out, saying no, 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 and of course we got made a show of and told we were going to miss our flight, and we had to get separated and put into separate rooms and padded, and literally they just padded us down. They didn't do anything. They didn't get rubber gloves out or anything along those lines. They certainly wouldn't have got past it with me anyway. But I went and researched it on Wikipedia, because that's I thought if I'm going to find anywhere that's telling me the bullshit about it, or telling me that it's good for you, then it will be Wikipedia. Even Wikipedia had on their millimeter wave page that it had not been tested thoroughly on humans, and it was still unknown as to whether it was safe for humans, and this
which is a lie. Which is a lie.
Yeah, exactly. They know exactly what they're doing, but we're only talking a couple of years ago when that was being put out, and I was being told by the security officer, or whatever the hell he's calling himself, that there is absolutely no safety issues with this millimeter wave scanner or whatever. And what cracked me up was the fact that this guy had no hair and no eyebrows, and he's stood next to this thing day in, day out, and he's telling me that this is fine for my children. This stuff's already here, people, so you need to clue up about it, or we're going to end up fried.
Well, according to Matt Landman, who was on our last show, who full-time is looking at this right now to produce another movie about it, he states that the cancer rate within those TFA agents who are near that radar device that they put you through is skyrocketing right now, which does not surprise me in the least. This is what's going on. They're going to try to strong-arm into the United States as quickly as they can, this method. And the reason they're doing it is because it's going to shorten lifespans. It's going to cause cancer. It's even going to change the natural resonance of nature. And this is another thing. You know, it's bad enough to have a natural world out there that most of us have forgotten about, and now we're off to some fictitious, nonsensical, dark-ass digital world that's been brought up around us. But this 5G network will actually start to change the resonant frequency of nature, animals, people, everything around these networks. And that should tell you something very critically important. And I would estimate that probably they will start strong-arming them into all these other places wherever they can. But if people don't stand against this, then it's about like the zebra at the watering hole. You know, the lion killed that zebra because he wasn't paying attention. So I'm going to ask, are you going to be the zebra that gets whacked by the lion? Or are you going to be the zebra that's paying the hell attention? Because there's lions around here.
Yeah. And on that note, I mean, do you think, I mean, if I was them, I would introduce the 5G network, and I would make it the most useful thing on the planet, and it would be toned down so that nothing discernible would be able to be seen in the first, say, 5 years, then 10 years, and then a little notch up, and then 15, then 20. Then you're onto a new generation that has no idea what the hell you're talking about. But am I right in saying that the 5G network could be cranked up at any time to incorporate what you were talking about, the active denial, the burning sensation, the vomiting, the death, if need be?
So look, you know, while probably I can't make a blanket statement, I will ask a question instead. Do we really want an antenna on every street corner which utilizes the same technology as an active denial system? They are both millimeter waves. What it actually takes to weaponize one of those, I can't tell you for sure, but I damn well know. I don't want an antenna utilizing the same technology as active denial systems on every street corner. That is just rife for the possibility of one crazy person gaining power, which is a bit laughable because the only people we have in power are crazy people, getting a hold of this thing and weaponizing it. The same argument was made as cell phones went online that it was a hair's breadth away from being able to radiate with microwaves. The point here is We can demonstrate all day long what 5G is and what it does to cells. And it's unhealthy. It will cause cancers. It will likely shorten lives. It will change the resonant frequency of your body. So now let's begin to think about the things in our body that have a resonance. Your heart has a resonant frequency. Your brain has a resonant frequency. And as my guest Matt Landman showed, that exposure to these 5G millimeter waves can actually change the resonant frequency. In other words, we may not be too far from the way we think being zapped right out of our head, or maybe possibly a carrier wave bringing something into our head that we didn't even think of. These are the things that you have to consider.
Crow, can I touch on that real quick? You said you were in that first Gulf War, and I remember hearing stories of like the V2K technology, that voice to skull technology being used. So when we rolled in with the tanks, they were just waiting for us, weapons dismantled, hands in the air, saying, well, Allah told us to. And I've heard stories of sort of the CIA technology sort of being used way back even during that first Gulf War. Just wondering maybe if you'd seen anything maybe even resembled some of that active denial system way back then.
Well, we know certainly. I know certainly because I had friends that were actually in some of the units where they had thousands or hundreds of thousands of people surrender all at once. We know that portion is true. It actually happened. From their point of view, the people that I knew in those units, was that the threat of military force was so overwhelming that they just wanted to get home to their families, and they thought they'd be killed if they stood against it. That was the point of view of my friends. I don't know what technologies might have been brought to bear, but I can tell you certainly that the mass surrenderings were a real thing, to the point where they found themselves in situations where they didn't have enough food. So the Marines were giving away their food to the prisoners because they had to supposedly conform to the Geneva Conventions, which again is a bit of a joke on the face of it.
So were you a Hollywood Marine, or did you get spit out of the island?
I won't talk wholly about where I went, but I was deployed when it first started, and then I will add as the tail end of that it all ended so quickly that most of the people deployed ended up going somewhere else.
I do vaguely remember that being over really quickly. Blink
of an eye.
I signed up for the Marine Corps when I was a junior in high school in the delayed entry program back in '95. If that sort of dates me at all, so it wasn't too far behind.
Good comment there. Man who stare at goats. Yeah, exactly. The military faking like it's going to get back into the natural sciences.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? Well, we have the Space Force. We'll just have a whole new picture.
You know what we need to do? We need to make, you remember back in the 60s, they used to have those puppets, the little puppet shows. We could make the space farce, and it'll be closer to reality.
Yeah, just a bunch of Muppets on strings. I get it.
Ain't nobody going to space because space is misdescribed, and you cannot leave this closed system. Alchemy proves it.
Yeah. Aside from the world has been misdescribed our entire lives, one of the best quotes from you, that one, and anything that you're getting for free makes you the product. Probably my two most often quoted lines ever. I just use those pretty much everywhere I possibly can, which is a lot of places.
Well, now the big thing is everyone's asking for bumper stickers that say "Belief is the enemy of knowing."
Yes, I love that.
That's part of my profile. On that note, we've been going over an hour. It's just speaking of things coming to an end quickly. That's just shot by. Should we have a hard break, Josh?
We certainly can. We can do a quick gravity break.
It's really up to Crow. He's the one that might have a time frame.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, we actually should be polite, eh?
Well, I certainly commit to at least an hour and a half. We'll see how it's going. If you guys want to take 5 to get some coffee or a whiz, I'm down with that.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah, that's what we'll do.
Thank you, everybody in chat. By the way, it just got too many to keep doing it individually. I love you all. We all appreciate it. And share, like, get those thumbs up. Thank you, guys.
So we're back in like 5 minutes, eh?
Yeah, it'll be just about that. I'm going to pull up some music right now, and as soon as I get that video going.
In fact, shout out just to one who is in chat, or was, Vagabond. We'll probably play his video in just a minute.
Yeah, it'll take us 5 minutes right, to line it up.
Yeah, you'd think this would be something I had ready.
I think what we haven't seen tonight, I've not seen from stopping traffic in my Rasta hat, I've not seen a classic IRM yet, so we've still got time.
Well, we haven't been classic IRM yet, have we? We haven't had any technical
I've
difficulties.
been told off and I need to mute. That's all.
Sure, you're going to bring the gremlins running, just saying those things aloud. My goodness.
That's right, we're jinxing the whole thing here. But Adam, you had a couple of shout-outs, didn't you? Get a bit of housework out of the way.
I'd appreciate that. I mean, I'll get the. It's actually gone amazing. I've not checked where it is, but there was a lady who used to work with me, Miss Jones, who shortly after retiring, the way life deals these shitty cards, was diagnosed with cancer. She's been in hospital now for a good few months, and our amazing NHS, cheeky bastards, honestly, the occupational health therapists, rather than helping her, set up a GoFundMe to get her home.
They set it up.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, mate. Honestly, it's shocking. Don't ever think the government's there for you. They're lying. As I said to one of my employees this week, it's a lot cheaper for them to convince you that the state will look after you than it is for the state to look after you. But a shout out to her, and we've had a kind of like a DIY SOS from family, friends, and people who have known her, people she's looked after for the years she worked with me and stuff. And I hate to do a bit of commercialism, but a shout out to Selco, a company that's opposite as a builder's merchant that's offered a lot of stuff to help her. And a gentleman, Patrick, today has been round to the house, and her house is kind of strangely preempting mud floods. So the back door and the front door is like 3 foot above the ground. And unfortunately, because of the cancer, she's had to have her legs adjusted, and she's got one leg longer than the other. And we need to help her get into the house before they'll allow her to return home. And the power of people, not the power of the state, has clubbed together. And the steps have been built today. So Kay's going to be able to return home. I don't think there's any. I'll get a link for the GoFundMe if anyone wants to give any more, but there's certainly enough there now to get her home and get the home set up in a way that will assist her.
Oh, that's good news.
To live at home, which is amazing. And like I say, mate, the power of people is moved me. What I've seen this week, people dropping stuff and making this thing happen.
Imagine what we could do if we didn't have to, or I say have to, but if the money we earned was the money we had, and we could freely give to those causes that we ourselves agreed with and backed, rather than giving 85% of our earned money in taxes to a fraudulent criminal government that can't even take care of its populace. Not that we need to realise that your government's not going to take care of you. You have to take care of yourself. We have to take care of each other. It's not for our government.
One, John.
I would actually add, with the technology age, there's a thing called robots, which have been way more sophisticated and way more prevalent than anyone has realized. It's quite possible, based on some of the birth statistics that Jason and I just did, that there is in fact a full push effort to get people to die younger, to make themselves sick with the foods they eat, because they don't need that many people anymore, because robots are going to be able to serve. Anyhow, guys, I'll be back in 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think we've got the break lined up.
We will as well.
Catch you in a minute.
Sounds good. We'll take a quick little break. For you fellas here on the call, I'll let you know we will go ahead and mute our mics, but the lines will be open, so we'll be able to hear each other. But luckily, God willing, the audience will not. So we will be able to have a quick little conversation if need be, which is something we don't always get. Let's see. Anything else? Nothing off the top of my head. So we'll just go ahead and get right to it then.
Because
quick little gravity break.
Because I trust the tech not to put our chats out over the break. Yeah. I'll be muted.
You'll be in trouble if I get caught singing, Josh.
Well, I'll tell you what, I am muting our mics as soon as I play the music, so feel free to belt it out. So that being said, we're going to take a quick little break. Be sure to join us right back here in just about 4 minutes. We'll return with what left time we have with Crrow.